Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Andrew Johnson Part 1, A Humble Beginning in Raleigh, North Carolina. Andrew Johnson was the 17th U.S. President. He served from April of 1865 till March of 1869, almost the entirety of Abraham Lincoln's second term, since Lincoln died only about a month into his second term, so Andrew Johnson served for about 3 years and 11 months. As U.S. President, Andrew Johnson was born in North Carolina in a very poor family. He worked as a tailor's apprentice. He had no schooling. He did not go to school at all. His father died when he was 3 years old. His mother worked as a seamstress and washerwoman. At age 17, Andrew Johnson moved to Tennessee and opened a tailor shop in Greenville, Tennessee. His wife, Eliza, taught him how to write, although he did learn to read growing up, but not in school. He was a father of 5 children with Eliza, a very hard-working man. He was elected mayor of Greenville, Tennessee at age 21, and he became a very good speaker. He was a congressman, Tennessee governor, and senator, the only Southern senator that did not support the Confederacy. He was appointed military governor of Tennessee by President Abraham Lincoln. And as I said, Abraham Lincoln, Johnson was elected vice president with Abraham Lincoln on the ticket in 1864 and assumed the presidency when President Lincoln died in April of 1865. He favored leniency towards the South after the war, at least toward white Southerners, and refused to protect the freed slaves, the freedmen in the South, from abuse and murder after the Civil War. With Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, he and those two are the only 3 presidents who have ever been impeached. All 3 were acquitted. In other words, they were not removed from office through conviction in an impeachment. Andrew Johnson finished Abraham Lincoln's second term. During his time as president, the United States purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million through the efforts of William Seward, the Secretary of State, and that was called Seward's Folly at the time, although it was really a very a good purchase. And Andrew Johnson, after being president, was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1874. He died of a stroke in 1875 at age 66. Again, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Donald Trump were the only U.S. presidents to be impeached. All 3 were acquitted in their impeachment trials. But Andrew Johnson was the first and only one up until Bill Clinton in the 90s. He never went to school for one day, although he actually became a very well-educated man, but just not through schooling, through his work, educated at work, and through self-learning. Andrew Johnson was born on December 29, 1808 in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was born in a 2.5-story log cabin, the 3rd child. The first child, William, was born in 1804. There was a sister, Elizabeth, who died in childhood. His father's name was Jacob, and his mother's name was Mary. They called her Polly. And they both worked at a hotel, at the Hotel Casso's Inn. His father, Jacob, made a living doing odd jobs, including milling. He was a porter at the bank, a constable. He was involved as captain of the town watch, the city bell ringer. His mother, Polly, was called Polly the Weaver. She was a seamstress, laundress, worked in a millinery shop selling hats. Jacob and Polly were married in 1801, and Polly's father served in the American Revolutionary War. Andrew Johnson, again, was the 3rd child of Jacob and Mary, also known as Polly, born in 1808 in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, Raleigh was the state capital then. I believe it still is. And that's where the state legislature would meet. Andrew Johnson's family was seen as white trash. After his 10th birthday, he lived at home off and on. His father died of a heart attack after saving 2 men from drowning in 1811. Andrew Johnson said this about his childhood, quote, I have grappled with the gaunt and haggard monster called hunger. So 1812, Jacob died. Andrew was only 3, so he had his father for a short time. A boat capsized in Hunter's Mill Pond in Raleigh. Jacob, Andrew's father, jumped into the water to save the passengers. Thomas Henderson, a publisher for the Raleigh Star, was one of them. They were out fishing. 3 people were in the water, and Jacob saved all 3. Later, Jacob rang the town bell and dropped dead. He must have overexerted himself. Jacob was considered a very good man, honest, sober, hardworking, humane, and friendly. So Polly, his widow, was left with these 3 children, and she worked taking in washing. She soon remarried another poor man named Turner Dowtree. 1818, Polly decided to have Andrew, her son, become an apprentice at J. Selby's tailor shop. Tailor, that means making clothing. November 8th, he was 10 years old. There was a contract that Andrew would work for this Selby till age 21, so for 11 years, learning the tailor's trade. Andrew Johnson biographer Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "Thus Andrew's early environment was not promising. As a poor white boy in a small southern town, he could not help but realize his lowly position. So he was an indentured servant tailor. Now the tailor was a familiar and essential figure in the life of the community, making clothes for men, coats, vests, pants, and greatcoats, also mending clothing. Now tailor shops were places where men liked to congregate to talk, to visit, and that including James Shelby's shop. The British radical Hugh Wolstenholme would come to this, among others, would come to the tailor shop and read aloud from the proletarian protest newspaper, the Sheffield Iris. He also read out loud from the Bible and Shakespeare. So as Andrew was working and learning the tailor business, he was listening to what was being said. And this is really how he became educated. And he was very inspired by what he heard. Of course, it was a difficult childhood since he had no father, and he was working at a young age. Biographer Annette Gordon Reed wrote, quote, "Andrew Johnson's struggle wounded him. He appears to have had it too hard early on. He never got over his childhood deprivation and the experience of being looked down upon by his so-called social betters." Again, Andrew Johnson never had a day in school in his life. However, he did become very well educated, mostly through self-effort. He did learn how to read, and after that, of course, it's up to you. One day, Andrew and his cousins were running across the path between the house of the wealthy John Devereux and his son's house, and Devereux sent his coachman to whip the boys back to their shanty, and Devereux called them poor white trash. Raleigh was the state capital, and the state house was made out of stucco imitation granite. In 1819, the Antonio Canova carved a statue of George Washington, which was brought to the middle of the State House under the new dome. The statue was pulled by 20 mules and escorted by the Raleigh Blues. This was a great occasion when this new statue of George Washington was erected in the Capitol. Biographer Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "Although Andrew Johnson freely played with mulatto children, he certainly could not escape the ingrained racism so prevalent in Southern society. Poor whites looked down on blacks, slave and free. Exposed to these attitudes at an early age, Johnson was never able to shake them off." Hans L. Trefus continues, quote, "Like other poor boys, Andrew Johnson probably heard the praises sung of Andrew Jackson, whose victory at New Orleans made him a national hero. Here was another Carolinian who had started at the bottom and not only made it, but had become the idol of the nation. Old Hickory's career seemed the very incarnation of the American dream. It was to be an inspiration for Andrew Johnson for years to come. So it wasn't all work for Andrew Johnson. Growing up, he played ball, went swimming and fishing in Hunter's Mill Pond, involved in youthful sports. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "But Andrew was no ordinary boy. Though deprived of schooling and books, he had a zest for learning. At this Selby's tailor shop, it was said that public-spirited citizens came to read to the tailors. Wasn't that nice? Read out loud. And so he was really listening. Andrew Johnson showed an interest in obtaining education, and he listened avidly. North Carolina tailor apprentices were little better than slaves. In other words, it was all work, except, as I said, this education that he received. The master was preparing the apprentice for trade and was supposed to teach them how to read and write. And usually the apprentice would live with his master, but Andrew lived with his mother during this time. 1824, Andrew was 15 and with his friends pelted the house of a neighbor with pieces of wood. And it was either because there was a young girl there. Either they disliked this girl or tried to impress her. And so the parents threatened to sue Andrew Johnson and his brother. The two boys fled Raleigh. They ran away. There was a $10 reward for the return of the boys. Now, he was 15 when he ran away from Raleigh. The boys walked 50 miles to Carthage, the county seat of Moore County, and to start to begin a new life. However, it remained dangerous for them to remain in North Carolina because they were considered runaways, and they were looking for them. And the description in the newspaper was that Andrew was brooding and forlorn. Andrew said that he left Raleigh, quote, "a penniless and inexperienced boy, to make my way in the world." Andrew Johnson loved the Constitution, especially the words, "we the people." 1824, Andrew crossed the state line and settled in Lawrence, South Carolina. And he found employment at a local tailor shop where he stayed for 2 years. So he was busy with work, still thirsty for further education. There were reports that Andrew Johnson, quote, "his nose was always buried in a book." Now, in this Lawrence, South Carolina, he fell in love with a local girl, Mary Wood, and proposed marriage and was rejected. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "her mother could see no advantage in tying her daughter's face to a penniless tailor." So this Andrew Johnson was very disappointed. He left Lawrence, South Carolina, and he wanted to clear his name. So he returned to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he was still wanted, and he had not finished his term as apprentice. However, James Selby was not in Raleigh. He was 20 miles out in the country, and Andrew went out to speak with him to try to make an arrangement so they could finalize their agreement. Selby was unreasonable. I guess he wanted him to come back and stay till age 21. They could not come to an agreement. So Andrew Johnson decided to leave North Carolina for good. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "then it was time to say goodbye. There were tears in his eyes, but he was determined to strike out on his own across the mountains in Tennessee." Hans L. Trefus continued, quote, "the lure of the West, which enticed so many young Americans, now drew Andrew Johnson toward the lofty mountain ranges dividing North Carolina from Tennessee, where imagined opportunities beckoned. Andrew arrived in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, 30 miles away. He arrived at sunset, looking for supper and a place to sleep. James Craig, a kind man, provided Johnson, Andrew, with a hearty supper and let him sleep there and provided breakfast in the morning. Then Andrew received news that a wealthy man, last name Brown, was moving to Tennessee from Chapel Hill, and he had covered wagons and slaves, and he agreed to give Andrew a ride. And so they traveled. Andrew traveled with this man, and they arrived in Knoxville, Tennessee. Then Andrew took a flatboat on the Tennessee River to Decatur, Alabama. Got a job in the small town of Mooresville, worked there for a short time. Then he walked 70 miles to Columbia, Tennessee, got a job with James Shelton, a tailor there. After 6 months, he returned to Raleigh, North Carolina. And again, he was trying to settle his issues with James Selby, and he could not. However, he decided to pick up his mother and stepfather, and the three of them returned to Tennessee for good. In September, the three of them reached Greenville, Tennessee. This is in eastern Tennessee. They camped the first night in Greenville, and later Andrew bought that land and planted a willow tree cut from a sprig on Napoleon Bonaparte's grave on St. Helena Island. And the tree was still there in 1998. So, Andrew Johnson had found his home, Greenville, Tennessee, which he decided he liked it there. He got a job at George Boyle's tailor shop, and he met a lot of people, the local people there, including Eliza McCardle, the daughter of a local shoemaker. Eliza was very attractive and had an above-average education. After a short time, Andrew moved to Rutledge in Granger County and worked at a tailor shop there as a journeyman. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, Andrew Johnson could not forget Greenville and the girl he had left behind. So he was writing letters to Eliza in the spring of 1827. He returned to Greenville for good. He proposed to Eliza marriage, and she accepted. And Andrew and Eliza were married on May 17, 1827, in Warrensburg, Tennessee. They were married by the Justice of the Peace Mordecai Lincoln, a cousin of Abraham Lincoln, who performed the wedding. Andrew was 18 years old, and Eliza was 16 and a half. They were married for nearly 50 years and had 5 children together. Much of her life, Eliza was not well. She was an invalid. She had consumption, and so that was tough. George Washington Jones of the Tennessee legislature wrote about Andrew and Eliza, quote, their temperaments were unlike. He fervent and aggressive, she calm and retiring. But their union was fortunate, and by her aid he was better prepared for the long encounter which fate held in reserve. Yes, they had a very good marriage. She wasn't very well, but they really loved each other. So she helped him a lot, his wife Eliza. William H. Crook, a White House guard, according to Hans L. Trefus, said, quote, he admired Andrew Johnson's tender and anxious consideration for his wife, feelings she more than returned. Solicitous for her husband's comfort, Eliza always saw to it that his room was in order, and delighted him with an occasional new gown, always in excellent taste. Now, Andrew and Eliza had frequent separations because of his political career, when Andrew would be at the state capital and national capital, while Eliza stayed at home with the children. And at the White House, as when Andrew was president, Eliza rarely appeared in public. Their daughter presided at social functions. Eliza supported Andrew throughout their marriage, especially including the trying times of the Civil War, when Andrew was considered an arch traitor by Confederates. Greenville, Tennessee is a beautiful town, and the Great Smoky Mountains are in the distance, so that's a nice sight there in Greenville. So, at the beginning of their marriage, Andrew and Eliza rented a house on Main Street. They had their living quarters in the rear, and in the front, he established his own tailor shop with a partner named Hentel W. Atkinson. Andrew Johnson's reputation as a tailor was that he had excellent workmanship and produced handsome clothes. He charged $3.50 for a coat, $1.50 for pants, $3.50 for a vest, and $10 for a suit. His business flourished. He did very well financially. He knew how to make money, and he knew how to invest, and did well with his investments in real estate and business. By 1829, Andrew ran for election as alderman in Greenville, Tennessee. And he won. Annette Gordon Reed, one of his biographers, wrote, quote, "The tailor's apprentice from Raleigh, North Carolina, had climbed to the first rung of the ladder that would take him to the presidency of the United States." Andrew was reportedly extremely fond and patient with children. So even though he was a very serious person, hardworking, but with his own children and other children, he was very good with them. So by age 27, he was elected to his first of 8 one-year terms as alderman in Greenville, and he was elected mayor in 1834, re-elected in 1837. He developed a reputation as an effective public speaker, a hard worker, a public servant, and preoccupied with his efforts for the working man against the aristocracy. In 1830 and 1831, Andrew was able to buy 2 town lots and 2 houses and a smith's shop in Greenville. Eliza gave birth in 1828 to daughter Martha, in 1830 to son Charles, 1832 daughter Mary, 1834 son Robert, and then in 1852 Andrew Johnson Jr. Andrew Johnson was working very hard during this time. His whole life he worked hard. He continued to pursue his education. He read every book he could find. He loved politics, oratory, and the legends of antiquity. And he became a very good public speaker, which really was the foundation for his political career. He joined the debate society there, which was, public speaking. He cultivated his talent for public speaking, even walking 4 miles to Tusculum College to join their debate society, where he could continue to practice his speaking skills. 1829, he was inaugurated March 4th in the local government in Greenville. This was a banner year in American democracy. Andrew Johnson was elected alderman and then re-elected 1830. Again, as we said, in 1834, January 4th, he was elected mayor of Greenville. He held that position on and on for the next 4 years. On August 29th, 1834, Andrew Johnson was charged with assault and battery on Thomas McClay, and the cause of the fracas is unknown. Yeah, he was a fighter. Definitely his whole life he was a fighter. And he expressed himself, and he wouldn't back down from a fight. He also joined the Tennessee militia. 1834, he became a trustee for the Raleigh Academy. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "With his tailor shop, a fashionable establishment, with his growing family, and with a succession of small political offices, it was obvious that young Andrew Johnson was making his way in the world." Hans L. Trefus continues, quote, "Andrew Johnson relished his newfound position of importance. It was satisfying to play a distinguished role in the village, to which he had come as a poor journeyman not too many years earlier." In 1834, Tennessee was able to create or have a new state constitution, removing property qualifications for office and holding and also the right to vote. And Andrew Johnson campaigned for this new constitution. 1835, Andrew was interested in being elected to the state legislature for Tennessee, and in the spring he announced his intent to run for that position. There was a debate of the candidates in Jonesboro and Jonesboro, Washington County, and Andrew Johnson demolished his opponents with his slashing, sharp ad hominem style, and he won the election. And then after that, he decided to lease out his tailor shop and headed for Nashville, the state capital of Tennessee. By 1835, Andrew Johnson was an established citizen with property, his tailor shop, and a farm. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "Although Andrew Johnson would never be able to forget his humble beginnings, which left him with a sense of insecurity, manifesting itself in frequent boasts about his popular origin, he would make the most of his new opportunity." Andrew Johnson arrived in Nashville in early October of 1835. It was unclear what party he belonged to, Democrat or Whig. One of the issues was the railroads, which were developing, helping greatly with transportation. But Andrew was against them because he said, well, that they were putting inns and drovers out of business. You know, the old people were the old roads where people would stop and the inns, and obviously there's always winners and losers when change comes, so he was against that. This was politically damaging, being against railroads, because the public liked them. It did hurt some people. His constituents were pro-railroads, but you could see he did care about those who were hurt by the development of railroads and whose businesses declined because they were no longer getting business. 1836, February 22nd, was George Washington's birthday. The legislature adjourned and celebrated. 200 attended in Nashville that celebration for George Washington's birthday in 1836. Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, "Whether Andrew Johnson was among the 200 persons present is not recorded. Most likely he hurried home. He never had much time for frivolity." So Andrew returned to Greenville after the legislature went on break, and he was unpopular because he had voted against railroad projects, which were dear to the hearts of the people of eastern Tennessee, connecting them with the rest of the country. So he resumed his tailoring business and various other business deals. Martha was 8 years old, Charles 6, Mary 4, and Robert 2. And so he ran for re-election to the Tennessee House of Representatives and was defeated. And again, the issue of railroads had hurt him. This was the only time he would lose an election till after the Civil War. He planned his comeback. In 1839, he announced that he was a member of the Democratic Party, and he became a very loyal Democrat. He was re-elected to the Tennessee legislature and supported the Martin Van Buren administration, President Martin Van Buren. Andrew Johnson had a penchant for economy. He voted against measures which cost money. He promoted the sale of public lands to the common man. Later, he became the father of the Homestead Act, which gave free land in the West to poor men. This was an era of rural isolation, so political speeches were a form of theater and entertainment. People would come to these political debates for entertainment, and Andrew Johnson entertained them as a gifted speaker. People flocked to see him talk, give speeches, or be involved in debates. Andrew Johnson supported Jacksonian democracy and was doing his part to build a strong Democratic Party machine in Greene County. He was a popular public speaker. People came from all parts of the county to hear him speak. He was forceful and powerful. Oliver B. Temple wrote, quote, "He held his crowds spellbound. There was always in his speeches more or less wit, humor, and anecdote, which relieved them from tedium and heaviness." Regarding his speeches, Hans L. Trefus wrote, quote, As Andrew Johnson declared that eternal vigilance was the price of liberty, and that power always meant stealing from the many to give to the few, the enthusiasm of the crowd knew no bounds. With his devoted group of supporters, built up by such methods, Andrew Johnson soon so dominated the county democracy that it followed him unquestionably, no matter where he might lead it. Biographer Gary Boulard, regarding Andrew Johnson's speeches in the small towns of Tennessee, quote, "These long harangues, punctuated by attacks of a most personal nature on his opponents, and quotations from the Bible, Constitution, or great works of literature, were splenetic events, obviously cathartic to an explosive personality, and always regarded as lively entertainment to listeners sitting on wooden benches in the summer heat, who were willing to take in a performance that could last up to 4 hours. Well, that concludes today's presentation. We'll continue next time with part 2 of the life of Andrew Johnson. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.